It's hard to share a stage with all these great Irish storytellers. When you're starting them off at 6 years old, Yanks have no chance. But fair play to Una and Declan for being in a workshop and then a week later being up on stage. So well done. And there's a lot of talk about Shanna Keys and storytellers. And this is a story from Leslie Slape, an American storyteller who actually devised a story about Shanna Keys in a time of lords and ladies, kings and castles, monsters and dragons. And at that time, the storyteller would go around from village to village, and as Jack said, sort of trading stories. He would tell stories in exchange for a hot meal or a warm bed. And so villagers would look forward to the storytellers coming because they didn't have TV, radio, things of entertainment that way. So when they came to the village, everybody was very excited, to the point that the lord of this town would make it an official feast day. He would open up his great hall, and things would be prepared for when the storyteller arrived. And everybody would come from far and wide and throughout the whole village. There that day was this one young maiden who actually had the burden of taking care of her young, very sick sister because her parents had recently died. And she almost wasn't going to go that night, but she knew that she would get some food that she could bring home and it would be sustenance for her sister. And in comes the storyteller, and everybody's up out of their seats, applauding and can't wait for the first story, to the point that they're asking, "Tell us a story, give us a good one." And the storyteller's a big smile, and he has his leather satchel, and he makes his way to the head of the great hall. And he puts his satchel down, and anyone sitting in the front row would see that it was full of beautiful, beautiful colored stones, which is unusual. And someone's saying, "Quick, quick, we need a story." And so the storyteller smiles, and he reaches over to his satchel, and he takes out the top stone. He says, "I have a new one for you. It's a really good one. I think you're going to like it." And he takes the stone in his right hand, and he covers his heart. He closes his eyes, he takes a big breath, and he begins the story. Once there was a father with 3 sons, and it's a story about adventure, thrilling sword fights, horse chases, malevolent behavior, and people are on the edge of their seat. They can hardly wait to hear how this ends, and no one wants to miss a word, so everyone's really quiet. And the storyteller finishes up, and he takes the stone and he puts it back in the satchel, and everybody's applauding. Beautiful story. Someone says, "How about another one? Give us a funny one. Give us a comedy." And so the storyteller, he looks in his bag, he pulls out a stone, a little red one, and he takes it and he covers his heart and begins the same way. Once there was a fox who met a bear in a woods, and before you knew it, they were off on hilarious antics. They would spar together, they'd play little tricks on each other, and the invention of the story was incredible. And so the people were at the edge of their seat, this time rolling practically in the aisles because it was so funny. And the storyteller finished up, and he takes a stone, he places it carefully in his bag. And people were just still weak with laughter that barely anyone would get out asking for another story. But there was a young couple in the front of the audience, and they said, "Might you have perhaps a love story?" And the storyteller loved stories. And he looks at them, he says, "Oh, I always have a love story." And so he looks into his bag, and he's looking for a particular stone, and it's shaped like a teardrop, and it's big. And he takes it, places it over his heart. Once there was a young couple, and he goes off telling a story that you think would be really beautiful, and it ends beautifully, but it's really a story of hardship, because the father and mother of both the girl and the boy didn't approve of the union. So they had a lot of trials and tribulations to prove their love. Before you knew it, there wasn't a dry eye in the whole place. In fact, pretty much everybody had a little tear just forming in the corner of their eye because they could relate to this. Just about everybody except one person. There was one man. He had a very, very dry eye because he wasn't there for the stories at all. He was a thief and a freeloader, and he was there only for the food. And when the storyteller was going on, and when he had taken that stone and put it over his heart, it kind of glinted. And the thief saw this, and he got curious. Like a snake, he wound his way through the group, and he was standing right there in front of the storyteller, and he looks into the bag, and he sees all these gems. They must be opals and sapphires and rubies, and he can hardly believe it. These are precious gems. And he doesn't even notice that the storyteller finishes the story. And he takes the teardrop-shaped stone, he puts it back in the satchel. It's solid silver, a huge solid silver stone. At this, the thief's mind is racing. How am I going to get these stones? And just then his opportunity came up because the storyteller said, "Well, thank you, everybody. You've been really wonderful. I need to wet my whistle and take a break. So I'm going to just make my way over to the bar, and I'll be back in a minute." I'll be back shortly. And at this point, the thief didn't want to miss a minute. And he quickly grabs the teardrop stone, throws in the little pouch off his belt, and then he grabs 2 more handfuls of precious stones into his pocket. Stealthy, because this is his career, he's well practiced, and out the door he goes without anybody seeing, he thinks. However, the storyteller saw him, and with his tankard he sees him and he thinks, what a poor man, poor, poor, poor. And the thief is gone into the dark of the night, and he's heading right for the appraiser's house, the jeweler. And so he gets there, and he sees a wee light on, and he bangs on the door, and he hears nothing. And he bangs again, nothing. And he's thinking maybe he's at the storytelling. He tries one more time, bang, bang, bang. Go away, I'm not working. And he says, no, let me in, bang, 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 it's me. He says, wait till you see what I brought. And so the door creaks open, and there's the tired jeweler. There's a little candle on at the table. And the thief goes right up the table, and he says, come here, look at this. He says, tell me how much it is worth. And the whole way there, all the thief could think of is how he was going to spend the money from all these precious gems. And so he takes the pouch and he gives it to the jeweler. And he says, have a look at that. And so the jeweler, he dumps the little pouch out. The stone drops out. And he says, this? I'd give you nothing for this. What? That solid silver? And the jeweler says, solid silver? This is a common rock you can find the side of any road. And he says, let me see that. And the thief takes it over the candle, and sure enough, it's just this ordinary brown rock. He says, what about these? He takes his jewels and he puts them on the table. And the jeweler says, those? And then the thief looks, and those are just common brown rocks. He says, but these are solid silver and rubies and sapphires. And the jeweler shaking his head, he says, not at all. He says, well, where did you get these? He says, well, when the storyteller had them. And the jeweler says, oh, they're storyteller stones, of course. He says, well, tell me one of the stories. And the thief says, I wasn't listening to the stories. He says, well, they're worthless then if you don't know the stories. That the thief was outraged. He pushed all the stones on the floor. And the jeweler says, I'm really tired, out with you. And with that, the thief goes out into the night. Meanwhile, back at the Great Hall, the storyteller is coming back onto the stage. And he's looking at his audience and he's thinking, which story shall I tell next? And people are applauding. They're glad he's back onto stage. And he sees the young maiden that was collecting food and putting in her apron. And he looks at her, about your age right there, and he thinks she needs a story. She needs a heart story. And so he goes to his bag, and he pulls out a stone. He takes it and covers his heart, and he starts off. Once, in a certain time, in a certain place, there was a young, fair peasant maiden. And he tells his story that is so full of anxiety and hardship, but she's really honest and true, and she works hard. And at the end of the story, there's a big sigh from the audience. It's such a beautiful story. And the girl and the storyteller never lost eye contact. And she comes right over to the storyteller afterwards and says, would you mind, is there any way that you could come and tell that story to my sister? She could really use that. And the storyteller looked at her and she said, I really would like to. He says, but I can't come to her house, but here. And he gives her the stone and says, you tell the story. And she says, oh no, I can't tell it like you. He says, oh, you can. I'm sure you can. And he says, please take it and you don't worry about that. Things will come to you. And so she takes the stone, she has the food in her apron, and she goes out the door. And she makes her way to her house, and she opens the door and goes straight for the bed where her sister is feverish and weak. And she puts all the food on the table, on the bed, and she says, sister, sister, it was a beautiful night. And the sister knows how much her sister loves stories. And she said, oh, great. And she says, the older sister says, I've got a story for you. And she's going to show her the stone, and she sees that it's an ordinary stone. And she's worried, and so she tries to hide it. And she remembers that the storyteller takes it and covers his heart, takes a big breath and starts, and she does the same thing. And when she did that, all these images started coming to her mind the minute she put the stone on her heart. And she was able to work her way through. She didn't remember some of the words, but she made some up, and she made it through. And the sister said, oh, that's a beautiful story, how wonderful. And she asked her if she would tell it again. And so she did. And she starts off, and things came clearer, and she was able to tell the story better this time. And the sister said, oh, it's so wonderful. And the older sister knew that this was more nourishment than any food could be. And throughout the whole night, the story was told over and over again. In the morning, when the sun came in through the window, there were two little girls lying in bed, heads together, and in one of them there's a beautiful, shining gold stone.